Hello, my friends. Welcome to another session on the Gospel of John. It's Ohio. It's a joy to be with you today as we spend this time together. Whenever it is that you're investing in this time, thank you. Thank you for your love and your willingness and your connection to the work that we're doing together. If this is something that you find beneficial or powerful, something that has impacted you, please feel free to share it with anybody that you would like. Feel free to share it on your social media page, or you can link it through any way that you do it. If you know someone who maybe this would impact, feel free to share it with them. This is all good stuff, and we want this to get out there and be shared with anybody and everybody. So feel free to do that, however that works, however you choose or desire to do that. If this is the first time you're joining with us, welcome. It's great to have you as part of our program, part of our sessions, part of our study. I would encourage you certainly to go back and listen to the previous sessions and follow up with where we've come before, because we are walking through this book from the beginning. So I certainly would encourage you to go back and hear some of the previous sessions or all the previous sessions. And even if you are part of this, you can always go back and listen again, because there's always more stuff that is revealed in the midst of the scriptures. That's what makes this such a joyous and a powerful book to study, is because there's always something to be revealed. The scriptures continue to reveal to us each and every day in all of the circumstances that we live in and all the moments that we face. So feel free. Feel free to reach out to me, contact me if you have any questions or any insight or what have you. If you have been following along and you're up to the next session, then welcome back. It's great to have you as part of the program, part of the sessions, and I hope that this is another beneficial session for you as you invest in your day and in your week. So I certainly always encourage you to have a Bible open before you, so that you can follow along with what's going on. One of the things about biblical study is that because of the culture, because of the availability of information, oftentimes the Bible's either misquoted or underquoted or quoted out of context. And so this is an opportunity. This is a place for us to really make sure that we're honing down on what the Bible is saying and the information that we're getting. And we're going to get some things here that are kind of touchstones. And the Gospel of John has a lot of quotes and a lot of things and a lot of ideas that come out of it that we want to make sure that we engage and that we're accurate on. So have a Bible open before you. The translation, or whether you're using a paraphrase or a translation. I work with the New Revised Standard Version. That is the version that is used for the lectionary, for the public proclamation in church. So you can use that. You can use the NIV, New International Version, the Oxford Study Bible, the Living Bible, the Good News Bible, the Message. Understand that each translation and each paraphrase are going to say different things, but they're going to hold on to the core message, the core meaning. And sometimes it's really cool, actually, to hear the different translations. I know when we do in-person Bible study, it's always very cool to hear the different translations used, because then that makes for different things. That makes for different ideas, and we hear different words used, and we can debate and kind of dig into why one word means something and another word doesn't. So certainly have different translations before you, but have the Word open. It's important to be in the Word. It's important as believers to be studying this stuff, not just to let somebody tell us what it means, but to really be studying it, to be reading it ourselves and digesting it ourselves. I'm a huge advocate for reading the Bible. I'm a huge advocate for opening the book and reading it. Now, I know a lot of it's boring and a lot of it's confusing and a lot of it doesn't necessarily make any sense. But you know what? That is okay. It's okay for that to happen. It's okay for it not to make sense, because it's okay for it, because you want to read it. You want to grow. You want to challenge yourself. So reading the Bible, we certainly have things that comfort us, and we love it, and they love us. Things like Psalm 23 is very comforting and very beautiful, and I find it to be very powerful, of course. However, there are also other areas and things that we're going to even see today that do challenge us. So I would encourage you as a believer to want to be challenged. I would encourage you as a believer to want to grow and experience and expand. Absolutely, definitely. So look into it and challenge yourself in it. It's definitely a play, a portion of where we go. All right, so we're in chapter 5. Now, John is the fourth book in the New Testament. Again, a little bit more Bible here for those of you who may not be comfortable or familiar wading through the book. Book's divided into two sections, Old Testament, New Testament. Old Testament is the story of God's work with the Israelites up to the birth of Christ. New Testament is all about the birth of Christ, the life of Christ, death and resurrection of Christ, and then also moves into what would be considered the growth of the church, the epistles, and that kind of stuff. So John is the fourth gospel in the canon in the Bible: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are what we call the synoptics because they're a synopsis of what Jesus did, a synopsis of his life, and they really, in a lot of ways, parallel each other, and they walk down very similar roads, which is okay, which is the way it's what a synopsis is supposed to do. John is very different. John is much more spiritual. John is much more, it's not as linear. It's chronological, but it's not as linear. We don't just like jump from event to event to event. It's not A, B, C, D, E. John spends a lot more time in teaching. John spends a lot more time in understanding events and explaining some things that the Synoptic Gospels don't. And we've kind of seen this already around Jesus' his revelation. I was looking for a word here. His revelation of his power into the world. With the changing of the water into wine, the revelation with Nicodemus, the conversation with the woman at the well. All of these to show that Jesus is not only the Son of God, but is the Word that was present at creation and is now made manifest in human form. That Jesus doesn't have the power to magically. This isn't magician's work here, and that's really the important part that we need to see. This is not a sleight of hand. Jesus isn't a magician. Jesus is the one who made everything. So Jesus has the power to remake everything. Jesus didn't commit some magic trick when he changed the water into wine by sprinkling it with wine additive or what have you. Jesus actually, as the maker of water, was able to remake the water into wine. No, he didn't remake all of the water into wine. The entire earth is not, it doesn't rain Merlot, unfortunately, sometimes I think, but nonetheless, Jesus has the capability, Jesus has the power to remake creation. Jesus has the power to rebreathe life into dead places. Jesus has the power to heal those who are broken. And we're going to see that today. And we're also going to confront some of the myths and the mysteries that take place. All right, so here we go. So we're in chapter 5. So John's the fourth book in the New Testament. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. We're in chapter 5. So the book is divided up in a chapter and verse. Now, it was not written this way. The Bible was not written this way. It was a long time since the initial canon, the initial Bible was put together. The first chapters were added, and then later verses were added. And this really was for studying. So chapter and verse was added far later to help with the study of the Bible. All right, so we're in chapter 5 right now. We're going to start chapter 5, and chapter 5 is going to take us in a different direction than where we were in the previous chapter. The previous chapter was about the woman at the well and Jesus' interaction with her, Jesus breaking down social boundaries, Jesus returning life to people who are broken, Jesus restoring. And that's really a lot of what has taken place here. A lot of what we're going to encounter in the Gospel of John, and really a lot of what we encounter in the Christian message, is restoration. Is that the structure, the temple cult, the leaders have established who is in and who is out. And because of that establishment of who is in and who is out, there's a lot of people who are outside of God's grace or outside of God's relationship. At least that's what the temple says. That's what the leaders say. And so Jesus, and again, the Christian message is all about restoration. The woman at the well was at the well at noon because she didn't have any connection with anybody. She didn't want to be around anybody. And yet Jesus restores her to wholeness. And then Jesus restores the people of Samaria. I mean, he brings the light of God to the people of Samaria, whom the temple cult, who the people have said are unacceptable, are outliers. And we're going to see this theme of restoration coming back again today. Okay, so chapter 5. So after this, there was a festival of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. So remember what I was talking about here, about this Messiah who traveled, about this God on the move. Unlike the rulers, unlike the king, unlike the ruling class who felt that the people had to come to them, that God was centered in the Holy of Holies and people had to come to them. People had to travel to them. Jesus is a representative who's on the move. Jesus moves from place to place, from people to people. Jesus is not one who sits still. And this is really important. This is a really important piece when we understand how God works in the world. We understand how God works in the world because God is on the move. God moves from place to place. So we see in the Gospel of John, there's a lot of movement. Jesus goes to Galilee. He goes to Capernaum. He goes to Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is really the hub. Jerusalem is the center. Jerusalem is the primary piece. Jerusalem is the city of God, as laid out for most of Israelite history. That Jerusalem is the place to be. That's where the temple is. That's where Herod's temple is. That's where the temple of God is. So Jesus goes to Jerusalem. So all of this now takes place in Jerusalem, in the Holy of Holies, in the center of town, the center of the region. Now in Jerusalem, by the sheep gate, there was a pool called in Hebrew Beth Zatha, which has 5 porticos. In these lay many invalid, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man there who had been ill for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been there a long time, Jesus said to him, "Do you want to be well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I am making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me." Jesus said to him, "Stand up, take your mat, and walk." And at once the man was made well, and he took up his mat and began to walk. All right. So there's a number of things going on here. So Jesus is in Jerusalem for this festival. And we're not really quite sure exactly what the festival is. It doesn't really say, just that he's up in Jerusalem for a festival. And while he's in Jerusalem for the festival, now I'm sure that there's probably some scholar out there that has probably made a really, really good guess as to exactly what festival this is. I just haven't found that. And really, it's not that it's not important to the story, but all it does is get Jesus to Jerusalem. It doesn't tell us anything about what Jesus is intending to do. It just gets Jesus to Jerusalem. And notice where he is. Okay, now in Jerusalem by the sheep gate. Okay, so what does this mean, the sheep gate? Now you have to remember that this is a time when there is a lot of people who are out there as shepherds and field herders and the such. And when they come into Jerusalem, they need a place to keep their sheep. So if you're a shepherd and you come into Jerusalem, it's kind of like where you're going to park your car when you go to the mall. Well, at the time period, where you're going to park your sheep while you go into town and rest and take a break and eat and get cleaned up and maybe have a little bit of fun if you have enough money to go buy that fun or whatever. So you got to have a place to put your sheep. So you have these sheep pens that the shepherd would bring in, and then they would pay, the gatekeeper to watch over the sheep. And there would be sheep all over the place. And we're going to see imagery of this come out later. But that's how it works. So you have this sheep gate. Now, this is not where the highfalutin people come in. Okay, this is kind of more like the back door to the city. So if you're expecting to see the celebrities and the stars coming in, they're not going to be coming in this way. So this speaks a great deal about how Jesus thinks and where Jesus' investment are. He is not strolling in through the front entrance. He is not strolling in and hanging out where all the beautiful people are going to see him. He actually is with the dirty and with the broken and with the ugly. I mean, remember, shepherds were kind of like the bottom of the barrel. So Jesus is milling about with the bottom of the barrel. And not only is he milling out with the bottom of the barrel, but he is around the pool of Beth Zatha. Okay? And this is where all of the invalid and the blind and the lame and the paralyzed are hanging out. This, I can't stress to you. So we know that in our world, some of the richest and some of the most powerful get rich and powerful because of their involvement with the poor and the blind and the lame and the paralyzed and the sick. Those who are higher up in the medical field, they engage those who need healing. But in this world, in the world of Jesus, the blind, the lame, the sick, the paralyzed, they were pushed to the corners. There was no benefit in interacting with them. As a matter of fact, there was the possibility of perceived negativity because there was a belief, at least by some, that God was punishing them with their illness. So if you help someone who was ill, you could literally be turning your back on what God was doing or God's punishment. You don't want to do that. Okay, so here's Jesus, and not only is he hanging out in the sheep gate, in the servant's entrance, if you will, he's hanging out in the servant's kitchen, but he's hanging out around the blind and the lame and the broken. He is bringing God to those who need God the most, but are deserving it. I'm air quoting deserving, you don't see it, but deserving it in the eyes of the temple cult, in the eyes of the leaders, the least. All right. So he is milling about with those to whom God really does need to come near to, but those whom can bring God near don't. All right. So he's going about and he's walking through these porticos. A portico is basically a porch. It was the pool had a structure around it and had these porches, these covered porches, because it was believed that this pool was magical. All right, this is where the rub comes in. This is where the thing is. It was believed that this pool was magical. So there was these porticos built around so that the people could come and experience the magical pool. And this magical pool, it was believed that this magical pool had healing properties. Okay, so here's what was believed. It was believed that an angel would come down and would stir the pool, would stir the water of the pool. And then the first person in the pool, when the angel stirred the water, that person was healed. That was the power of the pool. So all of these people are laid out, on the porticos waiting for the water to be stirred. And there was no time frame. It was not like Old Faithful where you pretty much knew or had a pretty good idea when this was going to happen. No, it could happen anytime, day or night. So these people who were sick or blind or lame or paralyzed, they would wait by the pool for the water to stir. And then whoever the first person was, they were the ones that would jump in. Now, as the myth goes, you couldn't just hang out in the pool because that's not how it works. You had to be out of the pool until the angel stirred the water. But it was hot and it was dry, so you didn't want to just like lay on the edge of the pool because you could lay there for days. And then so it was a waiting game. And as the man says, Jesus approached him. So the man was there. He'd been ill for 38 years. 38 years. So what's the point of that, of being that clear about the timeline? This guy has been sick a long time. And when you're sick, again, you figure can't work, don't have any family, don't have any place in God's synagogue or in God's temple. If you're sick, it's because God's punishing you. God doesn't love you. So this man has been ostracized from family, from community, from God for a long time. 38 years. And he's laying at the portico waiting for his chance to get in the water. But here's the deal. So he'd been there for 38 years when Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he'd been there a long time. Remember, we saw how Jesus can know this kind of stuff, how he can read into people, just like he did with the woman at the well. And keep in mind what I said earlier. It's not that this isn't a magic trick. Jesus made this. Jesus made people. Jesus breathed life into people. So he knows people. He knows intuitively what's going on in people. So he's able to read into what's going on in this man's life and knew that this man was there for a long time waiting to be healed. Okay, so long time waiting to be healed. And so he comes up to him and says, "Do you want to be made well?" Which is it's not necessarily a rhetorical question, because there could be a lot of reasons why he's laying there. But it is a statement of purpose. Do you want to be made well? Do you want to be whole? Do you want to stop being sick? Okay, so I want to pull back here for just a minute, and I want to reside on that question. Do you want to be made well? So initially, of course, we want to think to ourselves, of course we want to be made well. We all want to be made well. We all want to be well. That is the goal in life, right? To be well, to be made well. We come to Jesus and we say, of course, Jesus, we want you to make us well. Make us well. Heal us. But let's dig the deeper question. Do we really want to be made well? I want you to dwell in that for a minute, and I want you to look at your own life as that question resides inside of you. Do you really want to be made well? And what is it that you, and I ask myself this, what is it you or I are willing to do to be well? What is it as part of our identity, part of our work to be well? Are you eating right? Are you sleeping? Are you doing the investment work you need to do in order to be well? Now, this guy's laying at the pool. We don't know what's making him sick. We don't know what he's sick for. We don't know if he's sick with a disease that's curable. That's something that's about him. Maybe he's just been laying there this whole time, and because he's been laying there, his body stopped working. We don't know. We don't have any of that information. But notice that he never answers the question. He only gives an excuse as to why he isn't well. Jesus asked him, do you want to be made well? And the man comes up with an excuse. Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I'm making my way down, someone else steps down ahead of me. So he never says, yes, I want to be made well. He never says that is his goal in life. All he does is make excuses. He makes excuses as to why he isn't well, why this magical stirring of the pool isn't working, why this whole mystical, incredible healing process hasn't happened, because of his excuse. No one is there to put me in the water when the pool is stirred up, and because of my condition, I can't get there. Okay? But again, notice there's no acknowledgement of the answer, do you want to be made well? Which then I'm going to wrap back around to us. I mean, if this story doesn't, if this Bible, if these stories don't have any impact on us, if they don't crack us open and cause us to start thinking, then why bother reading it? So if I were to ask you, do you want to be made well? Or someone else were to ask you that, if you ask yourself, how many excuses are you going to come up with? How many excuses do we throw out there as humans as to why we're not well? I don't have time to work out. I don't have time to eat right. I don't know how to eat right. Somebody else does this. Somebody else does that. We like excuses. We like avoiding questions, because if someone says to us, do you want to be made well? And we say, yes, we want to be well. And they say, okay, well, get 7 hours worth of sleep at night, work out every day, eat right, drink a lot of water, and de-stress. Yeah, that's not going to happen. So you don't want to be made well. You just want to keep on living the way you're living. You see how this works? So when Jesus confronts the man and says, do you want to be made well? The man doesn't like, yes, I want to be made well at any cost. He gives excuses as to why he's still laying there. I'm still laying here because there's no one to pick me up and throw me in the well, which is one of the things that would happen. You know, you would have people who are sick, paralyzed, weak, and then you would have family members. And this is why I got earlier about not having any family. You would have family members who would wait, and then when the water was stirred, they'd pick up their loved one and carry him down and throw him in the water so that they'd be made well. Or you'd have someone who was sick but able to move, and they would get down into the water themselves. But this guy's making up excuses. 38 years he's been sick, and he's been laying there a long time. But he hasn't figured out how to get the magical thinking. And here is where the magical pool falls down and the true healer comes up. So again, this guy, he doesn't give an answer. He doesn't give an answer to Jesus. Jesus asks him the question, do you want to be healed? And there's all kinds of excuses. But then along comes the true healer. And this is the revelation that needs to and desired to be made in this circumstance, in this story. Because Jesus said to him, stand up and take your mat and walk. Now, Jesus doesn't say you're healed. Jesus just tells him to do what he has been wanting to do. So again, when we kind of paint this picture, we see this picture of someone who's on the mat, legs don't work, because he talks about, taking his time getting down to the pool, which means probably dragging himself down. There's probably some kind of paralysis or weakness of legs or whatever. So Jesus just makes him whole. Okay? So when we talk about healing, we want to talk about wholeness. And for me, there's a difference between being cured and being healed. You can be healed and still have an ailment of some kind. Healing for me is wholeness. He's about being made whole. And this man is made whole. Jesus says, stand up, take your mat, and walk. Stand up, take your mat, and go. Jesus is the healer. Jesus is the one who makes things right. There's no magic here. There's no, the man doesn't have to do anything. He doesn't have to go swimming in the pond. He doesn't have to make any kind of changes in his life. Jesus is the healer. Jesus is the one who does the work, the heavy lifting. And notice that faith really isn't even a part of this. Jesus doesn't ask the man if he believes in God or believes in the Messiah or anything like that. The only thing Jesus asks is, do you want to be made well? And the man comes up with excuse after excuse after excuse. So then Jesus says, stand up, take your mat, and walk. Get up and leave. Get up and go. Now, some may want to say that he was a charlatan, he was a faker. Well, that's why we hear that he's been ill for 38 years and he's been laying there a long time. So being there a long time indicates that his legs probably aren't working very well, if at all. So for Jesus to tell him to stand up and take his mat and walk means that Jesus is doing something to address or deal with his physical infirmity of some kind. So Jesus is the healer, and this is the revelation. Jesus wants those around him to see that he has the capability of reworking creation and bringing about the healing to the human body. At once the man was made well, and he took up his mat and began to walk. So he was on the road to healing. I mean, this was instantaneous, and that's what the point is. The point is it was meant to be instantaneous. It was meant to be done now and seen now. Unlike, again, and part of the thing about the pool with the angel is it could very well be that you got into the pool and you weren't made well. And that you were the first one in and it didn't work. The angel didn't stir the water the right way. But when we come to Jesus and Jesus heals, there's no question about it. It works. It's going to work. It's supposed to work because this is who Jesus is. So Jesus comes along, asks the man, doesn't accept excuses, doesn't wait for the man to show some kind of commitment. He heals him. Stand up, take your mat, and walk. This is a command. This is an imperative. Do this. Do this now. Stand up, take your mat, and walk. You're made well. You're made whole. You're made complete in the eyes of God. Stand up and take your mat and walk. So I want to make sure that we're really clear about this and about something that kind of comes out in the synoptics a little bit differently, but in our modern understanding, in our modern teaching, there's this idea that Jesus' power is only manifest or capable when we believe. So we initiate. It's our belief that makes God's power or Jesus' power acceptable or powerful. That's not the case. We see here in John, and we see it a number of times. I mean, at the wedding at Cana, there was nothing about belief in the bridegroom or the chief steward when Jesus turned the water into wine. There was nothing about belief in the heart of the Samaritan woman, the woman at the well, when Jesus speaks to her, and there's nothing about belief in this man. Jesus' power is Jesus' power, and he can wield it and use it whether someone believes in him or not, whether someone believes in God or not. So Jesus is the one who's in charge of this. Jesus is the one who is in control of this. And it's not about whether the man believed or not. Like I said, remember, there's nothing that says, do you believe in me? Do you believe in God? Do you believe in the Messiah? Do you believe in any of this? None of that is there. Belief is not part of the conversation. Just do you want to be made well? And even then, the man doesn't answer directly. He answers indirectly, and that's where Jesus works in a different way. All right, so we're going to pick up. We're in the middle of verse 9. Now that day was a Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been cured, "It is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your mat." But he answered them, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Take up your mat and walk.'" They asked him, "Who is the man who said that to you? 'Take up your mat and walk.'" Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had disappeared into the crowd that was there. Later Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you have been made well. Do not sin any more, so that nothing worse happens to you." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. Therefore the Jews started persecuting Jesus because he had done such things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, "My Father is still working, and I am also working." For this reason the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because he was not only breaking the Sabbath, but also calling God his own Father, therefore making himself equal to God. All right, so it's not just enough, and this is the fascinating thing here, is that the power of God is manifest in this moment where Jesus heals this man who has been ill for 38 years and tells him to pick up his mat and walk. Now, Jesus is a smart guy. Jesus knows exactly what's going to happen. For you see, in the time of Jesus, the understanding of the Sabbath had been truncated. It had been changed. So the Sabbath was meant to be a day of rest, a day where you didn't work, where you didn't have to do the duties of life. So you could set aside in order to spend time with God and spend time with family and rest. But what had happened is the observation of the Sabbath became so militant, so exacerbated with detail that you couldn't do anything, that you basically had to lay on the ground and do nothing for 24 hours. That is how you observed the Sabbath. So ultimately, the Sabbath was no longer the vehicle used to open oneself to have an interaction with God. The Sabbath itself was the God to be worshipped, because the God who was pointed to through the Sabbath was uncontrollable. But those who wanted power, those who were in control of the temple cult, those who were in control of those are the Pharisees and the scribes and the Sadducees, they wanted power, and they could use their power by controlling what happened on the Sabbath, making people feel guilty and shamed for working on the Sabbath, and that's what they're doing here. Now, Jesus knows this. Notice what Jesus tells him. Jesus tells him, "Take your mat and walk." Not leave your mat here and come back and get it tomorrow. So this is Jesus kind of poking the bear a little bit. He wants the Pharisees, because he knows the Pharisees, the Jews. And well, like I said before, whenever John says the Jews, it is not the general population. It is not the whole. It is the Pharisees, the scribes, the Sadducees, the ruler of the temple cult. So when John refers to the Jews, he's referring to the leaders, to those who pulled the strings. Now they see this man carrying his mat, which would be considered work. It would be considered, in the very narrow eyes of the Jews, work, of the Pharisees and the scribes, work. And I think Jesus wanted this recognition. Jesus wanted this man to be seen by those who would then call him out and criticize him, because he would do exactly what he did. They say, "You can't do this. Put that mat down. It's the Sabbath. You can't be working." And he's going to say, "But you know what? The man who healed me after 38 years of being ill, and it wasn't you, thank you very much, told me to carry my mat, told me to take up my mat and walk." Jesus knew that they would recognize this. Jesus knew that they would see this. And Jesus, I think in some way, wanted it to happen so that the message would then gain some credibility. It would gain some traction. What Jesus was doing would gain some recognition because this man was working on the Sabbath. Of course, so then, the dialogue. Who told you to do this? Who told you to take up your mat and walk? Well, and like I said before, the man doesn't even know who Jesus is. The man doesn't even know who the Messiah is. He can't give an answer. Just this man who told me to take up my mat and walk. So the power of God is pouring forth on this man, even though the man doesn't even know who the power of God is coming from, which is a fascinating statement about the power of God versus the need for or the dependence upon faith. Well, Jesus had disappeared into the crowd. After he told the man to take up his mat and walk, Jesus disappeared in the crowd. So the man can't say who it was. The man just, I don't know. The man had disappeared into the crowd. I don't know who it was. He's just a guy. He told me to take up my mat and walk. And I mean, for crying out loud, I've been waiting for so long. I was going to jump into a pool where the water was troubled in order to be healed. So I'm going to take anything at this point. So he took up his mat and walked. He did as Jesus told him to do. So then later, Jesus finds him in the temple. Later, Jesus finds him, walking around in the temple, doing his thing. And so Jesus said to him, "See, you have been made well. Do not sin anymore, so that nothing worse happens to you." Okay, so here's we need to deconstruct a little bit here for a minute. It would be very easy to assume or conclude that this statement that Jesus makes, "See, you have been made well, do not sin anymore so that nothing worse happens to you," is a direct correlation that his illness, the reason why he had been ill for 38 years was because he sinned. Okay, now this is a very common belief structure throughout the Old Testament, and really, quite frankly, it's still a very common belief structure today. That we are in the grips of some kind of physical illness because we sinned or because someone before us sinned. Now, I'm not going to argue. I mean, I certainly will argue that we can act sinfully in regards to how we treat our body or how we treat ourselves, and that can make us sick. Yes. But I do not believe, and Jesus is not advocating that here is God up in heaven looking at someone who's a sinner and then causing injury or pain or hurt or struggle in their lives because they're sinning. No, that's not where we're at here. And we don't want to jump down that road of thinking that Jesus is saying that this man was sick because he had sinned. Notice that Jesus did not say your sins are forgiven. Okay? Jesus doesn't say anything about sin in the healing. So what's Jesus referring to here? Now let's think about this for a minute. If you were sick for 38 years, if you were sick, if you were alone, your family didn't have a family, or your family abandoned you, the people in the synagogue and the temple had abandoned you, kicked you out, you had nothing. You were left alone, and now you've been healed. How likely is it that you would be pious, that you would be faithful? I would imagine that there probably, in the midst of a lot of joy, would be a lot of anger, a lot of grief, a lot of desire, a lot of rebellion, a lot of possibilities for sin. So Jesus is acknowledging the human condition, and part of the human condition is realizing that when we have been released from a prison that we've been in for a long time, we usually act in ways that celebrate that release, that celebrate that letting go. And so this is probably more along the lines of a caveat towards this man to say, be careful how you celebrate. Be careful what comes next, because you could sin. You could open your mouth and rail against the people in the temple. You could open your mouth and rail against God. You could go out and commit some kind of action that would be worse. Okay, that would be worse than just laying on a mat waiting to go climbing into a pool. Do not sin anymore so that nothing worse happens to you. That's a really strong statement to say, be careful what you do next. And I think that is something that, again, if we're going to let this reside inside of us, those are certainly words that need to reside inside of us as well. That's a concept or an idea. We've been set free by the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. We have been set free to be disciples of the Word. How do we respond to that? What do we do next? What do we do next with that blessing? What do we do next with that gift? What do we do next with that peace? That's a really important spiritual question for us. What do we do next? So, see that you do not sin anymore so that nothing worse happens to you, so that you may live a peaceful life. Well, so it's almost like, okay, again, Jesus wanted to poke the bear, but now it could be worse. I mean, this could be a worse thing that happens. So, the man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. So immediately the man goes to the Jews, to the Pharisees, the scribes, the Sadducees, the leader of the temple cult. He goes to those who are in charge, because remember, they asked him who did this, and he's like, I don't know who it was. So he finally figured out it was Jesus. So he goes and he tells them who it was, that it was Jesus. So then notice their reaction is that rather than the Jews, or again, the leaders of the synagogue, the Pharisees, the scribes, the Sadducees, rather than them saying, wow, this Jesus fellow seems to contain a great deal of the power of God, perhaps maybe we should be paying attention to him and listening to him, or all that kind of stuff. No, what do? They start persecuting Jesus because he was doing such things on the Sabbath. He was doing the act of God on the day that was set aside for God. Can we see the irony in this? The irony in this. They're so protective of the Sabbath that the one to whom the Sabbath is to point to comes and does the work on the Sabbath, and they miss it to protect the Sabbath. This is massive and really quite fascinating irony. Of all things that they're going to pin on him is that he is healing. He is healing people on the Sabbath. He is doing the work of God on God's day for God's people, and God's leaders are questioning him for it on the Sabbath. This is really the fascinating thing. And not only are they, bothered by it, but they begin to persecute him. They begin to aggressively go against him. They see him as an anti to what they're doing because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. On the Sabbath. Notice, they don't call him a blasphemer. They don't call him a heretic. They don't question his power. They do that in the other Gospels, and they'll do it a little later, but not yet. But notice that they pin this on him because he's doing it on the Sabbath. They're so caught up in making sure that the details are done right that they miss the work of God in the midst of the details. They miss the forest for the trees. They miss what God is doing because when God is doing it. Remember, this is God who determined what is holy on the Sabbath and what is not. And if God determines that it's holy on the Sabbath to heal, well then, it's holy on the Sabbath to heal. And who is the Pharisees, the scribes, or me to say what is or isn't? So Jesus answers them. Jesus doesn't let this go undone. My Father is still working, and I am also working. So Jesus is like, look, this is the work of God on God's day. I'm doing the work of God on God's day. Of course, then, the Jews, they take offense to Jesus calling God my Father. They take offense to Jesus referring to God as Father, which, again, it's a very personal relationship. It's a very personal thing, but here is Jesus referring to God as Father. And so then they get bothered even more by Jesus referring to God as Father, by Jesus referring to God in a personal way. For this reason, the Jews are seeking all the more to kill him, because he is not only breaking the Sabbath, but also calling God his own Father, thereby making himself equal to God, which we know that he is. Of course, again, who has the power to do these things? Who has the power to commit these acts? Nobody but God. And yet here Jesus is doing it. And notice Jesus doesn't call himself equal to God. He just refers to God as my Father. My Father is still working, and I am also working. My God is working on his day, and I am working on his day. That's what we're getting. That's what we're hearing. But there's this offense. Again, there's no moment where the Pharisees or the scribes believe in any possibility of God moving in this. There's no moment of pause or question or examination or spiritual development, nothing. The Jews are just like, the Pharisees and scribes are just like, this guy's a heretic, even though he healed someone who's been sick for 38 years. And he changed water into wine, and he did all that. And and Nicodemus came along and told us all the things but still, he's doing this stuff on the Sabbath, which means he couldn't possibly be God. And he's, couldn't possibly be anything but a heretic. So they're treating him with this contempt, and now they want to kill him. Now they're out to kill him for this interaction with God, which just makes this interaction and the whole thing all the more fascinating. That the Jews, that the Pharisees and scribes and the Sadducees are looking to protect the Sabbath and protect the temple by killing someone who's doing the acts of God and the work of God on God's day. Just fascinating, just a fascinating thing. And we're going to see this kind of crop up more and more. And I don't want to go too deeply into this whole connection between God and Jesus and how that's going to, kind of rub people the wrong way, because we're going to kind of lay into that a whole lot more. But we can see here that this is how Jesus is acting and interacting and wanting this to start to bubble up and wanting to have more of a public expression. It's not good enough just to keep it all to itself. All right, my friends, that's where we're going to stop for today. We're going to stop here. We'll kind of touch base again with this a little bit next week as we ramp up into the next portions. But so I hope this was helpful for you. Like I said, if it is and you want to share it, please feel free to do so. Please feel free to get it out there to anybody and everybody. My contact information will come up at the end of the session. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to me. I'll do the best I can to get back to you, either indirectly or I can touch base with in the next session if I think it's something that is clarity or something for the good of the whole. Hey, God bless you today. God bless you whatever your day brings, and wherever you go from here, I hope that you go with the Word and that you go with the direction of the Holy Spirit. We'll talk to you next week.